Hello, welcome to my channel where I talk mostly about watercolour, and I really like to use it in a contemporary and experimental way. So for today's video I'm going to be going through a few paintings and I'm going to be deciding which ones to stick in my sketchbook, and I'll show the process that I use to do that. And then I'm also going to take this painting here which I found, and I'm just going to finish it off by adding a bit more darker landmass to it, and in the process of doing this I'll also be able to show you how I managed to get that white line in there after I'd put the paint down. And I did actually do this painting during one of my live sessions, and I kind of forgot about it actually, and when I was looking through my paintings I found it and realised that it was quite nice, but it just needs a bit of a darker tone. So like I said, I'm just going to be using a wet and wet technique to put a bit more of a darker landmass down, and I'm using my Paynes grey, blue ultramarine and burnt sienna, and I'm just masking off this side of the painting there so that I don't get paint on that white border. Okay, so I mixed my paint together and I spent quite a long time doing that, so I've cut that bit out. But what I needed to do first was to get some really clean water down, because I'm going to be going back over the top of this painting, but I want the technique to be wet and wet. So I'm really carefully just putting a layer of water down on top of that paint, and I'm being really careful not to disturb the paint underneath. So I've just done like 3 strokes and then I'm leaving it. Okay, so I then mixed the paint a bit more, and I actually spent quite a long time doing that. So I wasn't rushing, even though I've got water on my paper, I wasn't rushing it. The paper is still wet and it's time to go in with my paint, and I'm just making a stroke in the middle. And actually what ended up happening was that I realised that I'd done that in too smooth of a motion, so I'm dabbing a bit as I did with the original painting, just to make that shape a little bit less regular. Now perhaps because I didn't put the paint down quickly enough when I got that water down, the bottom of that shape is looking quite hard. But it's possible afterwards to get your brush, and I've got some clean water on there and it's not too wet, and I'm just running it along the bottom, and that feathers that edge again. So that's what I'm doing there. And I just continued to work on that a bit, and I actually also got my sponge out and very carefully used the sponge to sort of soften the edges as well. And then I'm using that brush to kind of lift up some of the painting. I just want this shape to look in keeping with the shapes behind, which aren't perfectly smooth. Okay, so but I've speeded this process up, and then I got my hairdryer out and I dried this, and now it's time to lift off that paint to get that white line back. Okay, so what I'm going to use is this magic tape, and it's just waterproof on the surface, but you can also use some kind of masking tape if it's more like a sort of washi tape. So for example, this purple one here probably would be fine as well. I'm just going to use my magic tape. So what I'm going to do is carefully lay that down below and above this line that I want to have, and I'm going to make sure that it's really well stuck down along the edge. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get really clean water, and I'm going to use quite a stiff brush. So this is a brush made for acrylic paints, and I'm just lifting the paint off and using a paper towel to just lift it away. Working quite quickly, and some of the water is going under the tape, which looks quite alarming, but I know because I've done it before that that's okay. So if that happens to you, don't panic. Just keep going, and then when you lift the tape off, you just lift it off carefully, and the water shouldn't disturb the paint underneath. But if you are going to use this technique, it's probably a good idea to test it out on a painting that you don't care about too much for the first few times. So I'm just taking that tape off now. I'm doing it quite carefully, and it's just leaving that nice white line. Okay, so I'm going to put this painting aside, and I'll decide later whether to put it in my sketchbook or make it into more of a finished painting. So I've got my sketchbook here, and it's a bit of a mix of quite minimalist paintings and slightly more detailed paintings. And I think that's quite nice to have a variety. Another way of doing it would be to have one sketchbook that has, you know, one style in. But as this sketchbook is quite mixed, I'm just going to carry on with that, and I'll be putting some quite different looking paintings in here. I found these ones here, but it was actually this one that I decided I was going to stick down today, and as it's quite long, I thought it would be nice to have it going over 2 pages. Well, it won't completely go over 2 pages, but part of it will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the process that I use to do that, just in case you want to do something similar, or it might give you an idea. If you've got a sketchbook and you've got some paintings that you don't like, you can just stick other paintings on top. Okay, so what I've got here is this fantastic mat, and it's got these lines on, which means that you can cut things so that they're square. And now I also actually happen to have this kind of frame which is a very similar size to my sketchbook, so I'm just using that to work out how I'm going to crop this. But you don't have to use a mat, you could just measure your sketchbook page. Okay, so what I'm doing there in the background is I'm just cutting it into a vertical strip so that it fits in my sketchbook, but I'm not going to cut any of the edges off because I really want to see the whole width of that painting, and I'm going to be folding the edge. It was just a little bit too wide for the sketchbook, so I'm just cutting a very thin strip off the top and the bottom. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to score a line on the back so that I can fold the paper over neatly. Just doing that very lightly, and there I've been able to fold it so that when you turn the page, the painting's going to fold over with the page. Okay, so for sticking, I've got this pH neutral glue, and I'm adding water to it, and I'm using an old brush. I've got some newspaper here, and actually my painting goes quite well with this picture of Johnny Depp. But this glue does have a bit of water in, and that's going to relax the paper, which will mean that it dries flat in the sketchbook as well. So that's another really nice thing about sticking the paintings in the sketchbook, is that they'll become flat. So I'm just positioning it there. I've got the glue on the back, and I'm just going to put some books on top, and you don't need to wait very long. Sort of 10 minutes is enough. And then when you take your books off and you look at your page, you should have a really nice new page in your sketchbook. So my sketchbook definitely isn't finished. I've got pages here. I'm not quite sure what to do with them. But I have got one page here that I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put this painting next to it. I'm putting it on top of this painting that I don't like at all. And I think these two go really well together. But I'm going to cut this out as big as I can. And I'm going to really whiz through this process. I'm speeding it up a lot. It's exactly the same as the process that I did for that other painting. I think cutting the paintings out and sticking them in the sketchbook can make them look more finished, and it's quite a relaxing process. Something that I really like to do with my sketchbooks when I'm sticking paintings down is to think about the juxtaposition of the images. So this one's quite big, and the one on the left is a bit smaller, but they're similar, so they're similar colours and a similar theme. And I also think that it's quite nice to mix things up. So like I said, I've got these quite minimalist paintings, and that's quite a contrast with these more complicated ones, and this one obviously here is much bigger than those minimalist ones. So this sketchbook isn't finished. I've just stuck 2 paintings down today, but I feel like I've achieved something, and I can refer back to this sketchbook when I'm working on finished paintings. Okay, so this is the painting that I finished off at the start, and I'll just put that one aside in my pile, and I'll decide what to do with it later. I've also thought it might be fun to have a sketchbook where the paintings aren't stuck down quite so permanently, and that could suit paintings where you're not sure whether you want to ultimately frame them or not. I found this painting in my pile as well. This was a demonstration I did in a workshop, so I'm just taking the tape off in the background. But I really hope that you've enjoyed this video, and if you do have a sketchbook or you're thinking of starting one up, I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear about your thoughts on sticking paintings in sketchbooks, and about your thoughts on whether you like to mix your sketchbooks up or whether you like to have them in very definite themes. So thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please hit like, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I hope to see you in the next one. Okay, thank you. Bye.